The first-class cabin of Flight 748 was a world of luxury, plush seats, glasses clinking, and hushed conversations floating through the air. Passengers settled in, some scrolling through their phones, others sipping complimentary champagne. At Seat 3A, a woman sat quietly by the window, watching the world outside. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and she carried herself with an effortless grace that made people wonder who she was. No flashy jewelry, no designer logos screaming for attention, just a black silk blouse, fitted trousers, and a single gold bracelet. She had flown countless times, always preferring the same routine. No special treatment, no unnecessary attention. Just a peaceful flight. But today, peace was about to be interrupted. Elena Roberts, the lead flight attendant, was a woman who took her job seriously, sometimes too seriously. With 15 years of experience, she saw herself as the gatekeeper of first class, making sure only those who deserved to be there enjoyed its privileges. As she moved through the aisle, she checked on passengers with a polite but firm tone. She prided herself on maintaining order. Then she saw Evelyn Carter. Something about the woman in seat 3A made Elena's brows knit together. She hesitated. Then she walked over. "Excuse me, ma'am," Elena said, tilting her head slightly. "I need to see your boarding pass." A few passengers glanced over, sensing something in her tone. Evelyn blinked, but didn't argue. She simply reached into her sleek black handbag, pulled out the ticket, and handed it over. Elena studied it. First class, seat 3A. Paid in full, everything checked out, but Elena's fingers tightened around the slip of paper. "Are you sure this is your seat?" Her voice was polite, but the doubt was unmistakable. Evelyn's lips curved slightly. "That's what the ticket says," she replied smoothly. Elena hesitated, holding the ticket just a moment too long before forcing herself to hand it back. "Enjoy. Your flight?" she muttered, turning on her heel. Evelyn exhaled slowly, slipping the ticket back into her bag. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. By now, the plane had reached cruising altitude. The tension from earlier had faded into the background noise of the flight, or so Evelyn thought. Then Elena returned. Her movements were sharper this time, her expression tighter. She stopped at 3A, placing a hand on her hip. "I need you to come with me," Elena said, her tone a little too commanding. Evelyn looked up, calm but alert. "Excuse me?" Elena folded her arms. "We need to have a conversation, in private." Now passengers were watching, not just glancing, watching. Evelyn removed an earbud from her ear. "If there's something you need to say, you can say it right here." Elena's nostrils flared. "This isn't a discussion," she snapped. Evelyn tilted her head. "And if I don't?" Elena's jaw tightened. "Then I'll have to involve security when we land." A murmur ran through the cabin. Passengers exchanged quick glances, sensing the shift. David Langston, a seasoned businessman in seat 2C, lowered his champagne glass, eyes narrowing at the exchange. Mia Reynolds, flipping through a magazine, peeked over the top of the pages. Her expression unreadable. Something was wrong. And then, another flight attendant stepped in. Hannah Whitman, a younger, fresh-faced attendant, approached cautiously. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking between Elena and Evelyn. Before Evelyn could speak, Elena answered for her. "She's refusing to cooperate," Elena said sharply. Hannah blinked. "With what?" For the first time, Elena hesitated. Evelyn leaned back, watching the moment unfold. "She hasn't actually told me why she wants me to move," Evelyn said, her tone steady but firm. "I think we'd all like to hear it." Passengers leaned, and even those pretending not to pay attention. Hannah frowned, glancing at Elena. "Elena, what's going on?" Silence. Then Elena squared her shoulders. "I don't believe she's supposed to be in this seat." A sharp scoff came from a few rows back. Mia Reynolds shook her head. "You've got to be kidding me." Hannah's face paled. "You already checked her ticket, Elena." Passengers exchanged glances. Whispers started to spread. Elena stood firm. I need to verify it again. Evelyn's lips parted slightly, not in shock, but in understanding. She reached into her bag. Slowly, she held up the boarding pass for everyone to see. Here, she said smoothly. Go ahead, verify it, again. Elena hesitated, just long enough for Hannah to step in first. She snatched the ticket before Elena could and skimmed it. A second later, she exhaled sharply. She's in the right seat. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. David Langston set his drink down with a slow smirk. Elena's fingers twitched, her throat bobbed as she swallowed. And then, she made the biggest mistake of her career. She reached out and grabbed Evelyn's arm. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Several passengers stood up, and in that moment, Elena Roberts had no idea her career was already over. A collective gasp rippled through the first-class cabin as Elena Roberts grabbed Evelyn's arm. For a brief second, the plane felt completely silent, as if every passenger had stopped breathing. At once, then, the floodgates burst open. Whoa, what the hell? A man in seat 2C blurted out, half standing from his chair. Mia Reynolds, the woman flipping through a magazine, snapped it shut with force. Did she just— No way! Elena Roberts' fingers twitched as she realized what she had done. Her grip on Evelyn's arm was light, barely more than a touch, but it didn't matter. She had crossed a line, a very public line. Evelyn didn't move, didn't yank her arm away, didn't react in shock or anger. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if mentally filing this moment away for later. And that was somehow even more unsettling. Hannah, the younger flight attendant, was the first to break the silence. Elena. Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. She reached out and physically removed Elena's hand from Evelyn's arm. Elena, what are you doing? She whispered harshly. Elena staggered back, blinking rapidly. Her chest rose and fell quickly, like she was trying to process her own actions in real time. I was just— she stammered. Hannah's face was ashen. You just put your hands on a passenger. More whispers spread like wildfire. A man in seat 4B pulled out his phone. A woman in seat 5A was already typing furiously, possibly tweeting the entire disaster in real time. The cabin was no longer on her side. Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. This was slipping out of control, but instead of admitting her mistake, she did what people like her always do. She doubled down. I was just making sure everything was in order, she snapped. Hannah turned to her, furious. What does that even mean? You've checked her ticket twice. What part of everything is in order do you not understand? Evelyn finally spoke. Her voice was cool, controlled, calculated. No, let her continue. Elena's eyes flicked back to her. Evelyn leaned back slightly in her seat. Relaxed, her posture said, I have all the time in the world. Go ahead, Elena, Evelyn said. I'd love to hear why you're still questioning whether I belong here. Elena opened her mouth, then closed it. Because now? There was nothing left to say. Passengers were waiting, watching. Some already had their phones recording. She couldn't just walk this back. She had no explanation. And that's when Evelyn knew she had already won. Desperate to save herself, Elena took a new approach. She turned to the two male flight attendants at the front of the cabin. Call the captain, she said quickly. We need to report a disruptive passenger. The younger of the two men stiffened. Wait, what? He asked, looking genuinely confused. Elena gestured toward Evelyn. She's causing a scene. We might need to have security waiting at the gate. The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them. And the moment she said them, she knew she had completely ruined herself. Hannah took a slow step back, horrified. You're trying to get her removed? She whispered. After everything you just did? The passengers erupted. Are you serious right now? a man in 4B snapped. "Oh, hell no, not today," Mia Reynolds muttered, pulling out her phone. "We all saw what happened." Another woman in seat 6D yelled. Elena's plan had backfired instantly. She wasn't the one who was about to call the captain. The passengers were. Hannah, shaking her head in disbelief, turned and walked straight to the phone attached to the cabin. While Elena's stomach dropped. "Hannah," she hissed, "what are you—" Hannah picked up the phone, dialed directly to the cockpit. A second later, she spoke loud and clear. "Captain, we have a situation in first class," she said. "It involves a crew member." Elena's blood ran cold. Passengers murmured excitedly. This was officially bigger than anything she could cover up. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Understood," he said. "I'll be down shortly." Elena took a shaky breath. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was an investigation. She turned to Evelyn, her face pale. "But Evelyn—" She simply picked up her champagne glass, took a sip, and smiled, because she knew Elena Roberts' career was officially over. The air inside the first-class cabin felt electrically charged, thick with tension and anticipation. Every passenger knew something big was about to happen, and the person who knew it most? Elena Roberts. She stood stiffly near the aisle, her heart pounding in her chest, watching as Hannah calmly placed the phone back on the receiver. A second later, a chime echoed through the cabin, signaling an announcement. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be making a quick appearance in first class. Thank you for your patience." Elena's stomach dropped. This wasn't a routine visit. This was an intervention. Passengers were no longer just watching. They were waiting. Waiting for the moment Elena's lies fully collapsed. Waiting for the justice that was long overdue. Waiting for Evelyn's final move. And Evelyn? She sat completely composed, swirling the champagne in her glass, watching Elena slowly unravel. The younger flight attendant, Hannah, stood near the galley, arms crossed, ready to witness justice. Even the first-class passengers, normally distant and self-involved, had formed a quiet alliance against Elena. Elena's mind raced for an escape plan. Maybe I can talk my way out of this. Maybe I can make it look like a misunderstanding. But every option led to the same dead end, because this time she had gone too far. The curtain separating first class from the cockpit was pulled aside, and in stepped Captain Richard Hayes, a seasoned airline pilot with over 2 decades of experience. Tall, commanding, no nonsense. Elena instinctively straightened her uniform. "Captain," she greeted, forcing her voice to sound steady. He didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he turned. To Hannah first. "What's the issue?" His voice was calm but firm. Hannah wasted no time. There was an altercation between this passenger, she gestured to Evelyn, and Elena. Captain Hayes's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered toward Evelyn, and the moment he saw her, something shifted. Elena noticed it. Too. A small moment of recognition. The captain's gaze sharpened, and he asked, "Miss, would you mind confirming your name?" Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Then, in a tone that sent chills through Elena's spine, she said, "Evelyn Carter." Silence. Absolute silence. Captain Hayes blinked slowly. Then he inhaled sharply, like something just clicked. "Elena," he said, his voice quieter now, "please tell me you did not just lay hands on this woman." Elena's chest tightened. I didn't mean to." Captain Hayes closed his eyes for half a second, as if processing the sheer magnitude of her mistake. When he opened them again, his expression was stone cold. "Elena," he said, his voice dangerously low, "you just assaulted the CEO of this airline." Elena's breath hitched. "Wait, what?" Passengers gasped. A few even cursed under their breath. Hannah, standing beside the captain, slowly turned her head toward Evelyn in shock. Evelyn took a slow sip of her champagne, then set it down gracefully. I was waiting to see how far she'd take it, Evelyn said smoothly. Captain Hayes's face was unreadable, but there was anger simmering beneath the surface. Elena's legs nearly gave out. She staggered back, gripping the back of a seat. CEO? She stammered. Evelyn nodded. Owner, actually, she corrected. But close enough. Elena's face drained of all color. Passengers whispered furiously. This wasn't just a flight drama anymore. This was a career-ending catastrophe, Elena scrambled for words. I didn't know. That's exactly the problem, Evelyn interrupted. Her voice was cool, measured, lethal. You judged me. You assumed I didn't belong here. And then, when you were proven wrong, you tried to have me removed. Elena opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. And in the process, she continued, you managed to touch me without permission, on my airline. Captain Hayes exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Elena, he said, his voice full of disappointment, this is beyond unacceptable. Elena felt like she was suffocating everything she had built. 15 years of service, seniority, her reputation, gone. Captain Hayes turned to Hannah. Escort her to the galley, he said firmly. She's done for the remainder of this flight. Elena's breath caught in her throat. But you're done, Elena. Captain Hayes's voice was sharp. I'll be filing the report personally. Hannah stepped forward. Come on, she said, her voice void of sympathy. Elena felt her feet move automatically as she followed Hannah down the aisle. Passengers stared as she walked past, some whispering, some openly smirking. Mia Reynolds in seat 5A gave a slow, sarcastic clap. David Langston in 2C raised his glass in a mock toast. Elena kept her eyes forward, cheeks burning. She had started this flight thinking she controlled first class. Now, she was being escorted out of it. As soon as Elena disappeared behind the curtain, Captain Hayes turned back to Evelyn. His tone was respectful, careful. Miss Carter, I deeply apologize for what just happened. Evelyn smiled slightly. You didn't do anything wrong, Captain. He nodded once. Still, this shouldn't have happened at all. Evelyn picked up her champagne glass again. Don't worry, she said smoothly. It won't happen again. Because after this flight, Elena Roberts wasn't going to be a flight attendant anymore. The first-class cabin buzzed with whispers and stolen glances, but the tension had begun to settle. Elena Roberts was gone, escorted away in humiliating silence. And now, everyone knew the truth. Evelyn Carter wasn't just a first-class passenger. She was the CEO of the airline, and she had just watched one of her own employees ruin her own career. Behind the curtain, Elena sat in the back galley, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Hannah stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her carefully. For the first time in 15 years, Elena felt small. She had always been the one in control, barking orders, keeping everything in check. Now, she was just waiting to land, waiting for the official report, waiting for the moment she'd have to face the consequences. And the worst part? There was nothing she could do. Passengers were still stealing glances at Evelyn, their expressions a mix of respect and disbelief. David Langston, the businessman in seat 2C, turned slightly in his chair. So, he said, smirking slightly, do all your flights end like this? Evelyn chuckled softly. Not usually. Mia Reynolds, still clutching her half-finished glass of wine, shook her head in amazement. I have to say, she said, that was probably the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. Evelyn lifted a brow. Is that so? Oh, absolutely, Mia nodded. I mean, watching someone dig their own grave in real time? Chef's kiss. A few other passengers chuckled, but Captain Hayes, still standing nearby, wasn't smiling. His face was serious, his posture firm, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone listen. "Miss Carter," he said, "I can't tell you how embarrassed I am that this happened on my flight." Evelyn glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. Captain Hayes hesitated. Then he took a slow breath and added, "What happens next is entirely your call." Evelyn placed her champagne glass down, crossed her legs, and considered her next words carefully. She wasn't the kind of person who acted on emotion. She didn't believe in explosive revenge. No, she believed in precise, calculated accountability. She looked up at Captain Hayes, her voice smooth and firm. "Elena Roberts is done with this airline." Captain Hayes nodded immediately. There was no argument. "I'll file the report myself," he confirmed. Evelyn's expression remained neutral. "I expect an internal review by the end of the week," she continued, her CEO authority slipping effortlessly into her tone. "And I want every first-class flight attendant retrained in passenger service standards." Captain Hayes didn't hesitate. "Understood." Evelyn smiled faintly. Then she added, "And please let Elena know she won't be needing to report to HR. I've already made the decision." Captain Hayes exhaled, giving her a firm nod. "Yes, ma'am." Elena Roberts's career had just officially ended, and she wouldn't even get to plead her case. When the plane touched down, passengers gathered their belongings, but the mood had completely changed. People were chatting, exchanging glances, still reeling from what had just happened. As Evelyn stood to gather her coat, Captain Hayes approached her one last time. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "is there anything else I can do for you?" Evelyn gave him a small, knowing smile. "Just one thing," she said. Captain Hayes raised a brow. "And what's that?" Evelyn pulled her sunglasses from her bag, slipped them on, and stepped into the aisle. "Next time I fly first class," she said smoothly, "let's hope the service is better." A few passengers chuckled quietly. David Langston, still seated, let out a low whistle. Captain Hayes gave a small, sheepish nod. Understood. And with that, Evelyn Carter strolled off the plane, never looking back. Elena Roberts, still seated in the back galley, never even saw her leave. The plane had landed. The passengers had disembarked. The chaos in first class had settled. But for Elena Roberts, this was only the beginning of her nightmare. Elena sat in the back galley, staring blankly at the floor, her mind racing. The plane's once busy cabin was now empty, except for the crew. She could still hear the faint echoes of passengers leaving, the occasional whispers as they passed. Through the jet bridge, and then footsteps, firm, purposeful, unforgiving. She knew who it was before she even looked up. Captain Richard Hayes stopped just a few feet away, arms crossed, his expression stone cold. "Elena," he said, his voice void of emotion. She swallowed hard. "Captain, He held up a hand. "Don't," he said sharply. "Not a word." Elena's mouth snapped shut. Captain Hayes let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temple before looking at her again. "This is not how I wanted your career to end," he admitted. "But after what just happened, there's no coming back from this." Elena's breath hitched. There it was. The final confirmation. She had lost everything. "Elena Roberts," the captain continued, his voice carrying finality, "as of this moment, you are officially relieved of duty." The words hit her like a slap to the face. She tried to speak, but he wasn't finished. "You will not return to work," he continued. "You will not be reassigned. You will not be reconsidered." Each sentence was a nail in her coffin. He exhaled sharply. "I need your badge and wings." Elena froze. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her uniform pin, the small golden wings she had worn proudly for years. Slowly she unfastened them. Her hands felt heavy, as she placed them in the captain's outstretched palm. It felt like signing away her existence. He studied her for a moment before turning away. "Security will escort you out." Elena's stomach lurched. "Security?" she whispered. Captain Hayes didn't even look at her. "Yes," he said simply. "Because after today, you're no longer welcome here." Elena sat frozen as a uniformed security officer approached. Her, the same way she had once escorted unruly passengers off flights. Now, she was the one being escorted out. As she stood, a sharp pain settled in her chest. 15 years in the industry, gone. The reputation she built, destroyed. The job she loved, lost. And worst of all, she had done it to herself. Evelyn Carter walked through the bustling airport, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her pace slow and deliberate. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't flustered, because today had gone exactly as planned. As she reached the VIP exit, her private car was already waiting, but before she got in, she paused. From a distance, she could see Elena being escorted through the employee exit, head down, uniform slightly wrinkled. Evelyn watched for a few seconds, then she smiled. Not a smirk, not a grin, just a quiet, knowing smile. Then she slid into her luxury car, and the door shut behind her. Elena Roberts was officially in her past. And the airline? It would be better without her, because after today, everyone would remember one thing. You never know who you're messing with, and Elena had learned that the hard way. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated. Your support means the world.